Well, for more on this story, we're joined by Stephen Ellis. He's in Vienna and is the Director of Advocacy and Communication at the International Press Institute. Stephen, thanks for joining us on TRT World. So what needs to be done to ensure a free press?
Well, primarily, journalist safety needs to be addressed. Over the course of the last decade, we've seen the number of journalists killed in relation to their jobs skyrocket. That includes journalists caught in the crossfire, particularly lately in countries such as Yemen, in Syria, and Iraq. But also, journalists are increasingly being murdered to silence them from reporting. We especially see that in Mexico, in Brazil, the Philippines, and India. Governments need to be held to account. They need to be pushed to investigate these crimes to make sure that the perpetrators are actually brought to justice and that they realize that they will not enjoy impunity for these actions.
Well, Stephen, you've mentioned some of the worst offenders there. What do you see this situation as getting worse or any better in recent years?
In recent years, unfortunately, it is definitely getting worse. The number of journalists killed continues to climb each year. In the last decade, it was generally between 50 and 100 per year. Now, lately, it regularly tops 100 journalists killed. According to our research, just in last year alone, there were at least 110 journalists who lost their lives in connection with their profession. But there are a number, 35 names, that we're still tracking and researching to try and determine whether their murders were directly connected to their work. It's incredibly difficult because in many countries, authorities don't take these crimes seriously. They don't devote the resources necessary to investigating them and bringing the criminals to account.
And what do you put that down to, the lack of seriousness by authorities to deal with the killings of journalists?
It depends country by country. In some cases, it's related to corruption. In some cases, it's because the authorities don't want these stories coming out. In some cases, the authorities are directly responsible. And in other instances, the circumstances of the crime make them not easy to solve, and the authorities may not have devoted the resources necessary to investigating crimes such as this.
And Stephen, what balance do you think needs to be struck between having a free press and security concerns for nation states? There are often broadcast bans put in place when there are terrorist activities in a number of countries. What balance do you think needs to be struck between those two issues?
Well, it's difficult to say exactly where it is. It's going to differ instance by instance, country by country. But there has to be a legitimate interest in banning speech if that is decided it's necessary. It has to really be, is it going to incite imminent violence? Is it really going to actually cause crimes or threaten public order? Or is this a pretense by the government looking to silence speech that otherwise brings necessary criticism to light?
Well, Stephen M. Ellis, really good to speak to you. Thanks for joining us here on TRT World.